Facebook's research concluded?
I only... of their known research. I don't know what their other things say, but yes, there is documents that say those things.
So we had testimony last week in the Senate with a witness from Facebook who claimed that information was not accurate and needed to be in context. Now, of course, she wasn't willing to provide the context, the alleged mysterious context. Do you know of any context that would make those data anything other than horrifying and deeply disturbing?
Engagement-based ranking and these processes of amplification, they impact all users of Facebook. The algorithms are very smart in the sense that they latch on to things that people want to continue to engage with. And unfortunately, in the case of teen girls and things like self-harm, they develop these feedback cycles where children are using Instagram as to self-soothe, but then are exposed to more and more content that makes them hate themselves. This is a thing where we can't say 80% of kids are okay. We need to say, how do we save all the kids?
The Wall Street Journal reported that Mark Zuckerberg was personally aware of this research. Do you have any information one way or the other as to Mr. Zuckerberg's awareness of the research?
We have one of the documents included in the disclosures, it details something called Project Daisy, which is an initiative to remove likes off of Instagram. The internal research showed that removing likes off Instagram is not effective as long as you leave comments on those posts. And yet the research directly presented to Mark Zuckerberg said, we should still pursue this as a feature to launch, even though it's not effective, because the government, journalists, and academics want us to do this. Like it would get us positive points with the public. That kind of duplicity is why we need to have more transparency, and why, if we want to have a system that is coherent with democracy, we must have public oversight from Congress.
Do you know if Facebook, any of the research it conducted, attempted to quantify how many teenage girls may have taken their lives because of Facebook's products?
I'm not aware of that research.
Do you know if Facebook made any changes when they got back that 13% of British users and 6% of American users traced their desire to kill themselves to Instagram? Do you know if they made any changes in response to that research to try to correct or mitigate that?
I found it very surprising that when Antonia Davis was confronted with this research last week, she couldn't enumerate a 5-point plan, a 10-point plan of the actions that they took. I also find it shocking that once Facebook had this research, it didn't disclose it to the public, because this is the kind of thing that should have oversight from Congress.
So when you were at Facebook, were there discussions about how to respond to this research?
I did not work directly on issues concerning children. These are just documents that were freely available in the company, so I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Do you have thoughts as to what kind of changes Facebook could make to reduce or eliminate these harms?
You mentioned earlier concerns around free speech. A lot of the things that I advocate for are around changing the mechanisms of amplification, not around picking winners and losers in the marketplace of ideas.
So explain what that means.
Oh, sure. So like I mentioned before, like how on Twitter, if you have to click through on a link before you reshare it, small actions like that friction don't require picking good ideas and bad ideas. They just make the platform less twitchy, less reactive. And Facebook's internal research says that each one of those small actions dramatically reduces misinformation, hate speech, and violence inciting content on the platform.
So, and we're running out of time, but on the second major topic of concern of Facebook, which is censorship, based on what you've seen, are you concerned about political censorship at Facebook and in big tech?
I believe you cannot have a system that has as big an impact on society as Facebook does today, with as little transparency as it does. I am a strong proponent of chronological ranking or ordering by time with a little bit of spam demotion, because I think we don't want computers deciding what we focus on. We should have software that is human scaled, where humans have conversations together, not computers facilitating who we get to hear from.
So how could we get more transparency? What would produce that?
I strongly encourage the development of some kind of regulatory body that could work with academics, work with researchers, work with other government agencies to synthesize requests for data that are privacy conscious. This is an area that I'm really passionate about. And because right now, no one can force Facebook to disclose data. And Facebook has been stonewalling us, or even worse, they gave inaccurate data to researchers, as the scandal recently showed.
What data should they turn over? My time's
sure.
expired, so.
For example, even data as simple as what integrity systems exist today and how well do they perform? Like, there are lots and lots of people who Facebook is conveying around the world that Facebook safety systems apply to their language, and those people aren't aware that they're using a raw, original, dangerous version of Facebook. Just basic actions like transparency would make a huge difference.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Cruz. Senator Loomis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. If you were in my seat today instead of your seat, what documents or unanswered questions would you seek from Facebook, especially as it relates to children, but even generally speaking?
I think any research regarding what Facebook does problematic use, i.e. the addictiveness of the product, is of vital importance. And anything around what Facebook knows about parents' lack of knowledge about the platform. I only know about the documents that I have seen, right? I did not work on teens or child safety myself, but in the documents that I read, Facebook articulates the idea that parents today are not aware of how dangerous Instagram is. And because they themselves did not live through these experiences, they can't coach their kids on basic safety things. And so at a minimum, Facebook should have to disclose what it knows in that context.
Okay, so we're trying to protect individuals' data that they're gathering, have data privacy, but have transparency in the manner in which the data is used. Can we bridge that gap?
Imagine, I think reasonable people can have a conversation on how many people need to see a piece of content before it's not really private. Like, if 100,000 people see something, is it private? If 25,000 people see it, is it private? Just disclosing the most popular content on the platform, including statistics around what factors went into the promotion of that content, would cause radically more transparency than we have today on how Facebook chooses what we get to focus on, how they shape our reality.
Okay, if our focus is protecting the First Amendment and our rights to free speech while very carefully regulating data privacy, I've heard there are a number of things that are being discussed in Congress. Everything from antitrust laws to calling Facebook a utility, to the idea that you just raised of a regulatory board of some sort that has authority to, through understanding of the algorithms and how they're used and other mechanisms that create what we see, the face of Facebook, so to speak. Tell me a little more about how you envision that board working. What is in your mind, based on your understanding of the company and the ill consequences, what is the best approach to bridging the gap between keeping speech free and protecting individual privacy with regard to data?
So I think those issues are, they're independent issues. So we can talk about free speech first, which is having more transparency. Like, Facebook has solutions today that are not content-based. And I am a strong advocate for non-content-based solutions, because those solutions will also then protect the most vulnerable people in the world. In a place like Ethiopia, where they speak 6 languages, if you have something that focuses on good ideas and bad ideas, those systems don't work in diverse places. So investing in non-content-based ways to slow the platform down not only protects our freedom of speech, it protects people's lives. The second question is around privacy. And this question of how can we have oversight and have privacy? There is lots and lots of research on how to abstract data sets. So you're not showing people's names. You might not even be showing the content of their post. You might be showing data that is about the content of their post, but not the post itself. There are many ways to structure these data sets that are privacy conscious. And the fact that Facebook has walled off the ability to see even basic things about how the platform performs, or in the case of their past academic research, releasing inaccurate data or not being clear about how they pulled that data, is just part of a pattern of behavior of Facebook hiding behind walls and operating in the shadows. And they have far too much power in our society to be allowed to continue to operate that way.
Well, I had heard you make the analogy earlier to the tobacco industry, and I think that that's an appropriate analogy. I really believe we're searching for the best way to address the problem. And I'm not sure that it is the heavy hands like breaking up companies or calling them a utility, which is why your approach of integrating people who understand the math and the uses of the math with protecting privacy it is intriguing to me. So the more information that you can provide to us about how that might work to actually address the problem, I think would be helpful. So in my case, this is an invitation to you to provide to my office or the committee information about how we can get at the root of the problem that you've identified and can document. And save people's privacy. So I extend that invitation to you, and I thank you for your testimony. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thanks, Senator Lummis. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank our witness here. It's been a good hearing. A lot of information has been learned, particularly on the issue of how this is impacting our kids. I think we're going to look back 20 years from now, and all of us are going to be like, what in the hell were we thinking when we recognize the damage that it's done to a generation of kids? Do you agree with that, Ms. Hugan?
When Facebook has made statements in the past about how much benefit Instagram is providing to kids' mental health, like kids are connecting who were once alone. What I'm so surprised about that is if Instagram is such a positive force, have we seen a golden age of teenage mental health in the last 10 years? Yeah. No, we've seen
the opposite, right?
We've seen escalating rates of suicide and depression amongst teenagers.
Do you think those rates are at least in part driven by the social media phenomenon? There
is a broad swath of research that supports the idea that usage of social media it amplifies the risk for these mental health harms.
So right now, and this hearing is helping illuminate it, we are seeing—
And Facebook's own research shows that.
Right?
Yeah.
Say that again, that's important.
And Facebook's own research shows that. Right? The kids are saying, I am unhappy when I use Instagram and I can't stop. That if I leave, I'm afraid I'll be ostracized.
Right.
And that's so sad.
So they know that.
That's what their research shows.
So what do you think drives them to— I had this discussion with the witness last week, and I said, well, you know, I think they called it their timeout or stop. I said, but isn't that incompatible with your business model? Because your business model is more time online, more eyeballs online. Isn't that the fundamental elements of their business model?
Facebook has had both an interesting opportunity and a hard challenge from being a closed system. So they have had the opportunity to hide their problems. And like often people do when they can hide their problems, they get in over their heads. And I think Facebook needs an opportunity to have Congress step in and say, guess what? You don't have to struggle by yourself anymore. You don't have to hide these things from us. You don't have to pretend they're not problems. You can declare moral bankruptcy and we can figure out how to fix these things together. Because we solve problems together, we don't solve them alone.
And by moral bankruptcy, one of the things that I appreciate the phrase that the chairman and you've been using is one of those elements, which is they know this is a problem. They know it's actually impacting negatively the mental health of the most precious assets we have in America, our youth, our kids. I have 3 daughters. They know that that is happening, and yet the moral bankruptcy from your perspective, is the continuation of this simply because that's how they make money?
I phrase it slightly differently. We have financial bankruptcy because we value people's lives more than we value money, right? The people get in over their heads and they need a process where they admit they did something wrong, but we have a mechanism where we forgive them and we have a way for them to move forward. Facebook is stuck in a feedback loop that they cannot get out of. They have been hiding this information because they feel trapped, right? Like they would have come forward if they had solutions to these things. They need to admit they did something wrong and they need help to solve these problems. And that's what moral bankruptcy is.
Let me ask, I'm going to switch gears here, and this is, what's your current position right now in terms of its disinformation and counterespionage?
My last role at Facebook was in counterespionage.
I'm sorry, your last role, okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
So one of the things, this is a very different topic, and I only got a minute or so left, but right now is Facebook, I know Facebook is not allowed in countries like China, but do they provide platforms for authoritarian or terrorist-based leaders like the Ayatollahs in Iran? That's the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Or the Taliban, or Xi Jinping, my view, our biggest rival for this century, a communist party dictator who's trying to export his authoritarian model around the world. Do they provide a platform for those kind of leaders who, in my view, clearly don't hold America's interests in mind? Does Facebook provide that platform?
During my time working with the Threat Intelligence Org, so I was a product manager supporting the counter-espionage team. My team directly worked on tracking Chinese participation on the platform, surveilling, say, Uyghur populations in places around the world, that you could actually find the Chinese based on them doing these kinds of things.
So Facebook,
Yeah.
well, I'm sorry.
We also saw active participation of, say, the Iran government doing espionage on other state actors. So this is definitely a thing that is happening. And I believe Facebook's consistent understaffing of the counter-espionage, information operations, and counterterrorism teams is a national security issue. And I'm speaking to other parts of Congress about that.
So you are saying, in essence, that the platform, whether Facebook knows it or not, is being utilized by some of our adversaries in a way that helps push and promote their interests at the expense of America's?
Yes, Facebook's still very aware that this is happening on the platform. And I believe the fact that Congress doesn't get a report of exactly how many people are working on these things internally is unacceptable, because you have a right to keep the American people safe.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Sullivan. You may have just opened an area for another hearing.
Sorry, yeah. I have strong national security concerns about how Facebook operates today.
Well, Mr. Chairman, maybe we should, right? I mean, it's a
I'm
issue.
not being at all facetious. Thank you for your questions on this topic. And I know you have a busy schedule, but we may want to discuss this issue with you, members of our committee, at least informally. And if you'd be willing to come back for another hearing, that certainly is within the realm of possibility. I haven't consulted the ranking member, but or the chairwoman, but thank you for your honesty and your candor on that topic. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. First off, thanks for coming forward, and thanks for coming forward in a manner that you want to have positive change. So that's not always what happens. Earlier this year, I sent a letter to Facebook and other social media platforms asking them to detail the harmful impacts, including effects on mental health, their platforms have on children and teens. So your reports reveal that Facebook has been fully aware of this for a while, and the harmful impacts, especially on young women. So I think we all agree that's completely unacceptable. And we've got to figure out how we protect the people that are vulnerable in this country from the harmful impacts of Facebook and other social media platforms. So first off, do you think there should be greater consideration for age when it comes to using any social media?
I strongly encourage raising age limits to 16 or 18 years old based on looking at the data around problematic use or addiction on the platform and children's self-regulation issues.
So I think you addressed this a little bit, but why do you think Facebook didn't address this publicly when they figured it out internally that they were having an adverse impact on young people, especially young women? Why didn't they come forward and say, we've got a problem, we've got to figure this out?
I have a huge amount of empathy for Facebook. These are really, really hard questions. And part of why I was saying, I think they feel a little trapped and isolated is the problems that are driving negative social comparison on Instagram. Facebook's own research says Instagram is actually distinctly worse than, say, TikTok or Snapchat or Reddit, because TikTok is about doing fun things with your friends. Snapchat is about faces and augmented reality. Reddit is vaguely about ideas, but Instagram is about bodies and about comparing lifestyles. And so I think there are real questions where like Instagram would have to come in and think hard about their product or about like, what is their product about? And I don't think those answers are immediately obvious, but that's why I believe we need to solve problems together and not alone, because collaborating with the public will give us better solutions.
So do you think Facebook was trying to mitigate the problem?
I think within the set of incentives that they were working within, they did the best they could. Unfortunately, those incentives are not sustainable and they are not acceptable in our society.
Do you think Facebook and other social media platforms ought to be required to report any harmful effects they have on young people?
One of the things that I found very interesting after the report in the Wall Street Journal on teen mental health was that a former executive at the company said, Facebook needs to be able to have private research. And the part that I was offended by this was Facebook has had some of this research on the negative effects of Instagram on teenagers for years. I strongly support the idea that Facebook should have a year, maybe 18 months to have private research. But given that they are the only people in the world who can do this kind of research, that the public never gets to do it, they shouldn't be allowed to keep secrets when people's lives are on the line.
So
Because to be clear, if they make $40 billion a year, they have the resources to solve these problems. They're choosing not to solve them.
yeah. Didn't that surprise you? They wouldn't put more effort into this?
I know.
Because you know it's going to catch up with them eventually, right?
Yeah,
why wouldn't you?
like I mentioned earlier to Senator Hickenlooper, right? Coming in and having oversight might actually make Facebook a more profitable company 5 or 10 years from now, because toxicity, Facebook's own research shows they have something called an integrity holdout. These are people who don't get protections from integrity systems to see what happens to them. And those people who deal with a more toxic, painful version of Facebook use Facebook less. And so one could reason a kinder, friendlier, more collaborative Facebook might actually have more users 5 years from now. So it's in everyone's interest.
Do you think, I've got a bill, and there's a lot of bills that I think we've all talked about, but mine is called the Data Act. It's going to require express consent from users for large platforms to use algorithms on somebody. You agree with that? Shouldn't we consent before they get to take everything about us and go sell it? Like how they send things to us?
For selling personal data, that is an issue I believe people should have substantially more control over. Most people are not well informed on what the personal costs of having their data sold are. And so I worry about pushing that choice back on individual consumers. In terms of should people consent to working with algorithms, I worry that if Facebook is allowed to give users the choice of, do you want an engagement-based newsfeed, or do you want a chronological newsfeed, like ordered by time, maybe a little spam demotion, that people will choose the more addictive option, that engagement-based ranking, even if it is leading their daughters to eating disorders.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Scott. I think we have concluded the first round, unless we're missing someone who is online and not hearing anyone. Let's go to the second round. Thank you again for your patience. I know you have a hard stop, I think, at 1:30. So we'll be respectful of that limitation. And I'll begin by asking a few questions. First, let me say, Senator Klobuchar very aptly raised with you the principal obstacle to our achieving legislative reform in the past, which is the tons of money spent on lobbyists and other kinds of influence peddling, to use a pejorative word that is so evident here in the United States Congress. Some of it's dark money, some of it is very overt, but I guess the point I'd like to make to you personally is that your being here really sends a profound message to our nation that one person can really make a difference. One person standing up, speaking out, can overcome a lot of those obstacles for us. And you have crystallized, in a way, our consciousness here. You have been a catalyst, I think, for change in a way that we haven't seen. And I've been working on these issues for 10, 15 years. And you have raised awareness in a way that I think is very unique. So thank you not only for your risk-taking and your courage and strength in standing up, but also for the effect that it has had. And I also want to make another point, and you can tell me whether I'm correct or not. I think there are other whistleblowers out there. I think there are other truth tellers in the tech world who want to come forward. And I think you're leading by example. I think you are showing them that there's a path to make this industry more responsible and more caring about kids and about the nature of our public discourse generally and about the strength of our democracy. And I think you have given them a boost, those whistleblowers out there, in potentially coming forward. I think that's tremendously important. I think also, again, you can tell me if I'm wrong, there are a lot of people on Facebook who are cheering for you because there are public reports, and I know of some of my friends in this world who tell me that there are people working for Facebook who wish they had the opportunity and the courage to come forward as you have done, because they feel a lot of reservations about the way that Facebook has used the platform, used algorithms, used content, and pushed it on kids in this way. So those are sort of hypotheses that I hope you can confirm. And I also would like to ask you, because a lot of parents are watching right now. So you've advised us on what you think we should do, the reforms, some of them that you think we should adopt, stronger oversight, authorized by Congress, better disclosure, because right now, Facebook essentially is a black box.
Yes.
For most of America. Facebook is a black box. It's designed by Mark Zuckerberg Incorporated. Mark Zuckerberg and his immediate coterie, and the buck stops with him. And reform of Section 203, so there's some legal responsibility. So people have a day in court, some kind of recourse legally when they're harmed by Facebook, because right now it has this broad immunity. Most of America has no idea. Essentially, you can't sue Facebook. You have no recourse. Most America doesn't know about Section 230. And if you push a lot of members of Congress, they wouldn't know either.
It's actually slightly worse than that. Facebook made a statement in a legal proceeding recently where they said they had the right to mislead the court because they had immunity, right? That 230 gave them immunity, so why should they have to tell the truth about what they're showing?
Which is kind of
Shocking.
Well, it is shocking to a lawyer,
Yeah.
which some of us are. It's also utter disregard and contempt for the rule of law and for the very legal structure that gives them that kind of protection. So it's kind of a new low in corporate conduct, at least in court. So you provided us with some of the reforms that you think are important. And I think that the oversight goes a long way because it in turn would make public a lot of what is going on in this black box. But for now, since a lot of teens and tweens will be going home tonight, as you've said, to endure the bullying, the eating disorders, the invitations to feel insecure about themselves, heightened anxiety. They have to live with the real world as it exists right now. And they will be haunted for their lifetimes by these experiences. What would you tell parents right now? What would you advise them about what they can do? Because they need more tools. And some of the proposals that have been mentioned here would give parents more tools to protect their children. Right now, a lot of parents tell me they feel powerless. They need more information. They're way behind their kids in their adeptness online. And they feel that they need to be empowered in some way to protect their kids in the real world right now in real time. So I offer you that open-ended opportunity to talk to us a little bit about your thoughts.
Very rarely do you have one of these generational shifts where the generation that leads, like parents who guide their children, have such a different set of experiences that they don't have the context to support their children in a safe way. There is an active need for schools or maybe the National Institutes of Health to make established information where if parents want to learn on how they can support their kids, it should be easy for them to know what is constructive and not constructive. Because Facebook's own research says kids today feel like they are struggling alone with all these issues because their parents can't guide them. And one of the things I'm saddest when I look on Twitter is when people blame the parents for these problems with Facebook. They say, just take your kid's phone away. And the reality is those issues are a lot more complicated than that. And so we need to support parents because right now, if Facebook won't protect the kids, we at least need to help the parents to protect the kids.
If parents are anguished
They are.
about this issue, parents are hardly uncaring. They need the tools, they need to be empowered. And I think that the major encouragement for reforms is going to come from those parents. And you have pointed out, I think in general, but I'd like you to just confirm for me, this research and the documents containing that research is not only findings and conclusions, it's also recommendations for changes. What I hear you saying is that again and again and again, these recommendations were just rejected or disregarded, correct?
There is a pattern of behavior that I saw at Facebook, of Facebook choosing to prioritize its profits over people. And anytime that Facebook faced even tiny hits to growth, like 0.1% of sessions, 1% of views, that it chose its profits over safety.
And you mentioned, I think, bonuses tied to downstream MSIs.
To core MSI, yeah.
Could you explain what you meant?
So MSI is meaningful social interaction. Facebook's internal governance is very much based around metrics. So Facebook is incredibly flat to the point where they have the largest open floor plan office in the world. It's 1/4 mile long and one room, right? They believe in flat. And instead of having internal governance, they have metrics that people try to move. In a world like that, it doesn't matter that we now have multiple years of data saying MSI may be encouraging bad content, might be making spaces where people are scared, where they are shown information that puts them at risk. It's so hard to dislodge a ruler like that a yardstick, that you end up in the situation where because no one is taking leadership, like no one is intentionally designing these systems, it's just many, many people running in parallel, all moving the metric, that these problems get amplified and amplified and amplified, and no one steps in to bring the solutions.
And I just want to finish, and then I think we've been joined by Senator Young, and then we'll go to Senator Blackburn and Senator Klobuchar. I spent a number of years as an attorney general helping to lead litigation against big tobacco. And I came to hear from a lot of smokers how grateful they were, ironically and unexpectedly, that someone was fighting big tobacco because they felt they had been victimized as children. They started smoking when they were 7, 8, 12 years old because big tobacco was hooking them. And as we developed the research very methodically and purposefully, addicting them at that early age when they believed that they would make themselves more popular, that they would be cool and hip if they began smoking. And then nicotine hooked them. Now, physiologically, nicotine has addictive properties. What is it about Facebook's tactics of hooking young people that makes it similar to what big tobacco has done?
Facebook's own research about Instagram contains quotes from kids saying, I feel bad when I use Instagram, but I also feel like I can't stop, right? I know that the more time I spend on this, the worse I feel, but like I just can't, like that they want the next click, they want the next like, the dopamine, you know, the little hits all the time. And I feel a lot of pain for those kids, right? Like they say they fear being ostracized if they step away from the platform. So imagine you're in this situation, you're in this relationship where every time you open the app, it makes you feel worse, but you also fear isolation if you don't. I think there's a huge opportunity here to make social media that makes kids feel good, not feel bad, and that we have an obligation to our youth to make sure that they're safe online.
Thank you. Senator Young.
Jen, thank you for your compelling testimony. In that testimony, you discuss how Facebook generates self-harm and self-hate, especially among vulnerable groups like teenage girls. I happen to be a father of 4 kids, 3 daughters, 2 of whom are teenagers. And as you just alluded to, most adults, myself included, I've never been a teenager during the age of Facebook, Instagram, and these other social media platforms. And therefore, I think it can be really hard for many of us to fully appreciate the impact that certain posts may have, including, I would add, on a teen's mental health. So can you discuss the short and long-term consequences of body image issues on these platforms, please?
The patterns that children establish in their teenage years live with them for the rest of their lives. The way they conceptualize who they are, how they conceptualize how they interact with other people, are patterns and habits that they will take with them as they become adults, as they themselves raise children. I'm very scared about the upcoming generation because when you and I interact in person and I say something mean to you and I see you wince or I see you cry, that makes me less likely to do it the next time, right? That's a feedback cycle. Online kids don't get those cues and they learn to be incredibly cruel to each other and they normalize it. And I'm scared of what will their lives look like where they grow up with the idea that it's okay to be treated badly by people who allegedly care about them. That's a scary future.
Very scary future. And I see some evidence of that as to so many parents on a regular basis. Are there other specific issues of significant consequence that the general public may not be fully aware of that are impacting vulnerable groups that you just like to elevate during this testimony?
One of the things that's hard for people who don't look at the data of social networks every day, it can be hard to conceptualize the distribution patterns of harms or just of usage. That there are these things called power laws. It means that a small number of users are extremely intensely engaged on any given topic, and most people are just lightly engaged. When you look at things like misinformation, Facebook knows that the people who are exposed to the most misinformation are people who are recently widowed, divorced, moved to a new city, are isolated in some other way. When I worked on civic misinformation, we discussed the idea of the misinformation burden. Like the idea that when people are exposed to ideas that are not true over and over again, it erodes their ability to connect with the community at large because they no longer adhere to facts that are consensus reality. The fact that Facebook knows that its most vulnerable users, people who were recently widowed, like that they're isolated, that the systems that are meant to keep them safe, like demoting misinformation, stop working when people look at 2,000 posts a day, right? And it breaks my heart, the idea that these rabbit holes would suck people down and then make it hard to connect with others.
So Ms. Hodgin, I desperately want to, which is the American impulse, I want to solve this problem. And I very much believe that Congress not only has a role, but has a responsibility to figure this out. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I would value your opinion, though, as to whether you believe that breaking up Facebook would solve any of the problems that you've discussed today. Do you think it would?
So as an algorithmic specialist, so this is someone who designs algorithmic experiences, I'm actually against the breaking up of Facebook because even looking inside of just Facebook itself, so not even Facebook and Instagram, you see the problems of engagement-based ranking repeat themselves. So the problems here are about the design of algorithms of AI and the idea that AI is not intelligent. And if you break up Instagram and Facebook from each other, it's likely, so I used to work on Pinterest. And the thing that we faced from a business model perspective was that advertisers didn't want to learn multiple advertising platforms. That they wanted to learn, they got one platform for Instagram and Facebook and whatever, and learning a second one for Pinterest, Pinterest made radically fewer dollars per user. And what I'm scared of is right now, Facebook is the internet for lots of the world. If you go to Africa, the internet is Facebook. If you split Facebook and Instagram apart, it's likely that most advertising dollars will go to Instagram, and Facebook will continue to be this Frankenstein that is altering, that is endangering lives around the world, only now there won't be money to fund it. And so I think oversight and finding collaborative solutions with Congress is going to be key because these systems are going to continue to exist and be dangerous even if broken up.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Young. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a text that was just put up by Facebook's spokesperson, Andy Stone. It says, just pointing out the fact that Frances Hogan did not work on child safety or Instagram or research these issues and has no direct knowledge of the topic from her work at Facebook. So I will simply say this to Mr. Stone. If Facebook wants to discuss their targeting of children, if they want to discuss their practices of privacy invasion or violations of the Children Online Privacy Act, I am extending to you an invitation to step forward, be sworn in, and testify before this committee. We would be pleased to hear from you and welcome your testimony. One quick question for you. What's the biggest threat to Facebook's existence? Is it greed? Is it regulators? Is it becoming extinct or obsolete for teenage users? What is the biggest threat to their existence?
I think the fact that Facebook is driven so much by metrics and that these lead to a very heavy emphasis on short-termism, that every little individual decision may seem like it helps with growth, but if it makes it to more and more toxic platform that people don't actually enjoy, like when they passed meaningful social interactions back in 2018, Facebook's own research said that users said it made it less meaningful, right? I think this aggregated set of short-term decisions endangers Facebook's future. Okay. But sometimes we need to pull it away from business as usual, help it write new rules if we want it to be successful in the future.
So they can't see the forest for the trees.
Yes. Very well
Thank
put.
you. And I know Senator Klobuchar is waiting, so I'll yield my time back, and I thank you.
Thanks, Senator Blackburn.
Thank you very much, and thank you to both of you for your leadership. And all three of us are on the Judiciary Committee, so we're also working on a host of other issues, including the App Store issues, which is unrelated to Facebook, actually, including issues relating to dominant platforms when they promote their own content or engage in exclusionary conduct, which I know is not our topic today. I see the thumbs up from you, Ms. Haugen, which I appreciate. And I think this idea of establishing some rules of the road for these tech platforms goes beyond the kid protection that we so dearly need to do. And I just want to make sure you agree with me
Yes,
on that.
Totally. I was shocked when I saw the New York Times story a couple of weeks ago about Facebook using its own platform to promote positive news about itself. I was like, wow. I knew you shaped our reality. I wasn't aware it was that much.
Right. And that's a lot of the work that we're doing over there. So I want to get to something Senator Young was talking about, misinformation. And Senator Lujan and I have put together an exception actually to the 230 immunity when it comes to vaccine misinformation in the middle of a public health crisis. Last week, YouTube announced it was swiftly banning all anti-vaccine misinformation. And I've long called on Facebook to take similar steps. They've taken some steps, but do you think they can remove this content, and do they put sufficient resources? We know the effect of this. We know that over half the people that haven't gotten the vaccines is because of something that they've seen on social media. I know the guy, I walked into a cafe and said his mother-in-law wouldn't get a vaccine because she thought a microchip would be planted in her arm. Could you, which is false, I'm just saying that for the record here, could, in case it gets put on social media, could you talk about, are there enough resources to stop this from happening?
I do not believe Facebook, as currently structured, has the capability to stop vaccine misinformation because they overly rely on artificial intelligence systems that they themselves say will likely never get more than 10 to 20% of content.
There you go. And yet it's a company that, the cap was over $1 trillion, one of the world's biggest companies that we've ever known. And that's what really bothers me here. Senator Lujan and I also have pointed out the issue with content moderators. Does Facebook have enough content moderations for content in Spanish and other languages besides English?
One of the things that was disclosed, we have documentation that shows how much operational investment there was by different languages. And it showed a consistent pattern of underinvestment in languages that are not English. I am deeply concerned about Facebook's ability to operate in a safe way in languages beyond maybe the top 20 in the world.
Okay, thank you. We go back to eating disorders. Today you've said that you have documents indicating Facebook is doing studies on kids under 13, even though technically no kids under 13 are permitted on the platform. The potential for eating disorder content to be shown to these children raises serious concerns. Senator Blumenthal's been working on this. I've long been focused on this eating disorder issue, given the mortality rates. Are you aware of studies Facebook has conducted about whether kids under 13 on the platform are nudged towards content related to eating disorders or unhealthy diet practices? CNN also did investigation on this front.
I have not seen specific studies regarding eating disorders in under the age of 13, but I have seen research that indicates that they are aware that teenagers coach tweens who are on the platform to not reveal too much, to not post too often, and that they have categorized that as a myth. You can't be authentic on the platform, and that the marketing team should try to advertise to teenagers to stop coaching tweens that way.
Wow.
So I believe we've shared that document with Congress already.
Exactly. Well, thank you. And we'll be looking more. Speaking of the research issue, Facebook has tried to downplay the internal research that was done, saying it was unreliable. It seems to me that they're trying to mislead us there. The research was extensive, surveying hundreds of thousands of people traveling around the world to interview users. In your view, are the internal researchers at Facebook who examine how users are affected by the platform, is their work thorough? Are they experienced? Is it fair for Facebook to throw them under the bus?
Facebook has one of the top ranked research programs in the tech industry. Like they've invested more in it than I believe any other social media platform. And some of the biggest heroes inside the company are the researchers because they are boldly asking real questions and being willing to say awkward truths. The fact that Facebook is throwing them under the bus, I think, is unacceptable. And I just want the researchers to know that I stand with them and that I see them.
Or maybe we should say, as the name of one book, The Ugly Truth.
Yeah.
What about Facebook blocking researchers at NYU from accessing the platform? Does that concern you? These are outside researchers.
I am deeply concerned. So for context, for those who are not familiar with this research, there are researchers at NYU who, because Facebook does not publish enough data on political advertisements or how they are distributed, these are advertisements that influence our democracy and how it operates. They created a plugin that allowed people to opt in, to volunteer, to help collect this data collectively. And Facebook lashed out at them and even banned some of their individual accounts. The fact that Facebook is so scared of even basic transparency that it goes out of its way to block researchers who are asking awkward questions shows you the need for congressional oversight and why we need to do federal research and federal regulations on this.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Thanks, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Markey.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your incredible leadership on this issue. As early as 2012, Facebook has wanted to allow children under the age of 12 to use its platform. At that time in 2012, I wrote a letter to Facebook asking questions about what data it planned to collect and whether the company intended to serve targeted ads at children. Now, here we are 9 years later, debating the very same issues. Today, Ms. Hogan, you've made it abundantly clear why Facebook wants to bring more children onto the platform. It's to hook them early, just like cigarettes, so that they become lifelong users, so Facebook's profits increase. Yet we should also ask why in the last 9 years has the company not launched Facebook for Kids or Instagram for Kids? After all, from the testimony here today, Facebook appears to act without regard to any moral code or any conscience, or instead puts profit above people, profit above all else. The reason why Facebook hasn't officially permitted kids 12 and under to use its platform is because the Child Online Privacy Protection Act of 1998 that I'm the author of exists. Because there is a privacy law on the books, which I authored, that gives the Federal Trade Commission regulatory power to stop websites and social media companies from invading the privacy of our children 12 and under. That's why we need to expand the Child Online Privacy Protection Act. That's why we need to pass the KIDS Act that Senator Blumenthal and I have introduced, and why we need an Algorithmic Justice Act to pass, because the absence of regulation leads to harming teens, stoking division, damaging our democracy. That's what you've told us today. So, Ms. Hogan, I want you to come back to the protections that you are calling on us to enact. This isn't complicated. We're going to be told online all day with these paid the Facebook people, oh, Congress can't act. They're not experts. It's too complicated for Congress. Just get out of the way. You're not experts. Well, this isn't complicated. Facebook and its big tech lobbyists are blocking my bills to protect kids because it would cost them money. That's how complicated it is. So let's start with the KIDS Act that Senator Blumenthal and I that would ban influencer marketing to kids. Today's popular influencers peddle products while they flaunt their lavish lifestyles to young users. Can you explain how allowing influencer marketing to teens and children makes Facebook more money?
The business model that provides a great deal of the content on Instagram is one where people produce content for free. They put it on Instagram for free, no one's charged for it. But many of those content creators have sponsorships from brands or from other affiliate programs. Facebook needs those content creators to continue to make content so that we will view content and in the process view more ads. Facebook provides tools to support influencers who do influencer marketing because it gives them the supply of content that allows them to keep people on the platform, viewing more ads, making more money for them.
Yeah, so I am actually the author of the 1990 Children's Television Act. What does that do? Well, it says to all the television networks in America, stop preying upon children. Stop using all of your power in order to try to get young children in our country hooked on the products that are going to be sold. We had to pass a law that banned television stations from doing this. That's why I knew that after my law passed in 1996 to break up the monopolies of the telecommunications industry and allow in the Googles and the Facebooks and all the other companies, you name it, that we would need a child privacy protection there because everyone would just move over to that new venue. It was pretty obvious. And of course, the industry said, no way we're going to have privacy laws for adults. And they blocked me from putting that on the books in 1996. But at least for children, I got up to age 12. That's all I could get out of the industry. But we also know that as time has moved on, they've become even more sophisticated so that the KIDS Act is necessary to stop children and teen apps from being features such as likes and follower accounts that quantify popularity. Ms. Hogan, can you explain how allowing these features that create an online popularity contest makes Facebook more money?
Just to make sure, so I am only familiar with issues regarding teens from the research I have read of Facebook's. So I want to put that caveat in there. The research I have seen with regard to quantifiable popularity is that as long as comments are allowed, so this is not a quantitative thing, this is just comments, as long as comments are still on posts on Instagram, just taking likes off Instagram doesn't fix the social comparison problem. That, teenage girls are smart. They see that Sally is prettier than them. Her pictures are really good. She gets tons of comments. They don't get very many comments, right? And so I do think we need larger interventions than just removing quantitative measures. Facebook has a product that is very attractive. The reason why they have the study of problematic use is because it is kind of addictive. And those kinds of things, like having lots of little feedback loops, keeps kids engaged. And like I mentioned earlier, part of why Facebook switched over to meaningful social interactions was it found that if you got more likes, more comments, more reshares, you produced more content. And so having those systems of little rewards makes people produce more content, which means we view more content and we view more ads, which makes them more money.
Okay, and the KIDS Act that Senator Blumenthal and I are advocating for also prohibits amplification of dangerous and violent content to children and teens. Can you explain how algorithms pushing that dangerous content makes Facebook more money?
I don't think Facebook ever set out to intentionally promote divisive, extreme, polarizing content. I do think, though, that they are aware of the side effects of the choices they have made around amplification. And they know that algorithmic-based ranking, so engagement-based ranking, keeps you on their sites longer. You have longer sessions, you show up more often, and that makes them more money.
So do you believe we have to ban all features that quantify popularity as a starting point in legislation?
As I covered before, the internal research I've seen is that removing things like likes alone, if you don't remove things like comments, doesn't have a huge impact on social comparison. So I do believe we need to have a more integrated solution for these issues.
Okay. Should we ban targeted advertisements to children?
I strongly encourage banning targeted advertisements to children. And we need to have oversight in terms of, I think the algorithms will likely still learn the interests of kids and match ads to those kids, even if the advertiser can't articulate, I want to target on this interest.
Right. How much money does Facebook make from targeting children?
I don't know what fraction of their revenue comes from children.
Okay, so ultimately children are not commodities.
No.
They've always been given historically special protections. That's what the Children's Television Act of 1990 is all about. They've always been given this special safety zone so that children can grow up without being preyed upon by marketers. When I was a boy and the salesman would knock on the front door, my mother would just say, "Tell him I'm not home. That man is not getting into our living room." Well, I would say to my mother, "But you are home." "Not to him," she would say. Well, we need to give parents the ability just to say, no one's home for you and your company and your attempts to prey upon children, to get into our living room. That's our moment in history. We have to make sure that we respond to the challenge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Markey, and my thanks to Senator Markey for his leadership over many years on protecting children. As you've heard, he was a champion in the House of Representatives before coming here, but well before I was in the United States Senate. But around the time I was elected Attorney General, I've been very pleased and honored to work with him on legislation now going forward. And I join him in thanking you. I have just a few concluding questions, and I seem to be the last one left standing here. So the good news is I don't think we'll have others. But as you may know, you do know, my office created an Instagram user identified as a 13-year-old girl. She followed a few easily identifiable accounts on weight loss, dieting, eating disorders, and she was deluged literally within a day of content pushed to her by algorithms that in effect promoted self-injury and eating disorders. Are you surprised by that fact?
I'm not surprised by that fact. Facebook has internal research where they have done even more gentle versions of that experiment, where they have started from things like interest in healthy recipes, so not even extreme dieting. And because of the nature of engagement-based ranking and amplification of interests, that imaginary user was pushed, or that real account was pushed towards extreme dieting and pro-anorexia content very rapidly.
And that's the algorithm.
That's the algorithm.
That algorithm could be changed.
The algorithm definitely could be changed. I have firsthand experience from having worked at Pinterest. Pinterest used to be an application that was heavily based just on you follow certain people's pins, and those are put into your feed. And over time, it grew to be much, much more heavily based on recommendations, that the algorithm would figure out, what are you interested in? You can have wonderful experiences that are based on human interactions. So these are human scale technologies, not computers choosing what we focus on.
So the average parent listening here, worried about their daughter or son being deluged with these kinds of content, would want that kind of algorithm changed, I would think, and would welcome the oversight that you're recommending.
I believe parents deserve more options and more choices. And today they don't know even what they could be asking for.
I just received by text, literally about 15 minutes ago, a message from someone in Connecticut. And I'm going to read it to you. It's from a dad. I'm in tears right now watching your interaction with Frances Haugen. My 15-year-old daughter loved her body at 14, was on Instagram constantly, and maybe posting too much. Suddenly she started hating her body dysmorphia, now anorexia, and was in deep, deep trouble before we found treatment. I fear she'll never be the same. I'm brokenhearted. I think people tend to lose sight of the real world impact here. And I think that's the reason that you're here. I'd just like to invite you, if you have any words to those other employees at big tech, the workers who may be troubled by the misconduct or unethical conduct that they see, what you would tell them.
We live in a pattern that we have seen throughout time with regard to technologies is that humans are very crafty people. Like we find interesting solutions, but we often get out over our skis, right? We develop things that are of a larger scale than we really know how to handle. And what we have done in the past is when we see this happen, we take a step back and we find institutions and we find frameworks for doing these things in a safe way. We live in a moment where whistleblowers are very important because these technological systems are walled off. They are very complicated. They're things that you need to be a specialist to really understand the consequences of. And the fact that we've been having the exact same kinds of false choice discussions about what to do about Facebook, is it about privacy or oversight? Is it about censorship or safety? Like the fact that we're being asked these false choices is just an illustration of what happens when the real solutions are hidden inside of companies. We need more tech employees to come forward through legitimate channels like the SEC or Congress to make sure that the public has the information they need in order to have technologies be human-centric, not computer-centric.
Thank you. On that note, we'll conclude. Thank you for an extraordinary testimony. I think that anybody watching would be impressed and much better informed. And you've done America a real public service, I think.
Thank you.
The record will remain open for 2 weeks. Any senators who want to submit questions for the record should do so by October 19th. This hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
Even watching live pictures here on Capitol Hill will stay as we still can see some of the lawmakers working their way out in addition to the whistleblower there for Facebook. She is a Facebook whistleblower. She released tens of thousands of pages of internal research and documents surrounding addiction and the dangerous, many times harmful consequences involving our kids and the multi-billion-dollar company. Frances Haugen just came before the committee there alleging Facebook hides its research about its shortcomings and that Facebook researchers have repeatedly found that the photo sharing platform is toxic for our teen girls. Facebook has aggressively pushed back against these reports. Let's bring back once again business correspondent Deidre Bolton, also SiriusXM radio host and ABC News contributor Mike Muse, and also Roger McNamee, who wrote Zucked, author about Mark Zuckerberg, also a mentor, we should say, Roger, to Mark and Cheryl. Let's start with you. Pushing forward and looking at fixes and where do these lawmakers take this now and what happens next? There were a number of bills that were mentioned in detail. Also, in particular, a reform of Section 230, in addition to possibly, we heard this from Haugen, creating some sort of regulatory body to oversee Facebook and its actions. Where should we begin? Because it gets pretty technical and in the weeds, but maybe you can make sense of it for us on what you think could be a good solution here. Where do you even begin?
So I work very closely with members of Congress on precisely these issues. And there are three categories of regulation that are required here. We need to think about safety, privacy, and competition. And here's the way you have to think about it. Section 230 was originally created in 1996 to protect internet platforms, essentially allowing for the people who use internet platforms to put their own opinions up without the platform being held responsible. It works the same way that it worked for telephone companies that were not held responsible for the content of phone calls because they couldn't control that. The problem is the courts have interpreted Section 230 to provide blanket immunity to internet platforms. It really began with a case related to Grindr, which was a dating service. And really horrible things have basically been sanctioned as okay under Section 230, which is nuts. And so the notion that it must either be reformed or scrapped, I think, is well understood. But when we're thinking about safety, it's actually a much bigger problem than that, because 230 only applies to internet platforms. And surveillance capitalism, which is the business model that Frances Haugen was describing, that is now being adopted throughout the economy. And we really need to address the much broader implications. And so that requires something that looks like an FDA that requires tech companies to prove that their products are safe before they're allowed to have them in the market. And I think they would have to continuously get this approved. And I think on privacy, it's very simple. Right now, there is literally no protection to the consumer. Every time you make a financial transaction, every time you get a medical test or a prescription, anytime you use your smartphone, anytime you use an app, anytime you go on the web, all of that data is tracked at your individual level. And it's available in a marketplace and sold to people who create these models of your life in order to both predict your behavior and manipulate it. That is so blatantly unfair. And we need to basically have a ban on surveillance capitalism, which starts by saying, I'm sorry, no third-party use of health information, financial information, location information, and anything you do on the web. Those, it strikes me, that's the very beginning. And then on competition, part of the problem we have, yesterday, Facebook goes down, all 3 applications disappear for 6 hours. And people are stuck because there is no alternative. These guys are monopolies. And so we need to do all 3. And we need to do them more or less at the same time. Fortunately, there are different committees of Congress, so you can actually run these things at the same time. There are people who really understand these issues, particularly the House of Representatives. So I'm feeling moderately optimistic.
Oh, wow. We've got a positive. Okay, we got a little bit of a thumbs up here then from Roger. Mike, let's go to you. What are your thoughts about moving forward? We heard how Roger feels with regard to if he were sitting before these lawmakers, what he would suggest and see as good reforms and moving in the right direction. I think about a regulatory body, but my goodness, how long that could take to put together when you just think of government bureaucracy.
I know. I love it. I love the conversation between you and Roger and then tossing it to me because I love where it's going, where you and Roger just went regarding Section 230. Section 230 is one of the most complicated things for a lot of Americans to understand. I mean, but the idea that it was just simplistically the 26 words that created the internet has developed into this most complicated context of understanding. And then where do you apply Section 232 and then where you don't? So much of this conversation has been focused on platforms like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter when it comes to Section 230, but I think it's important for the average American to also understand that Section 230 will also have impact on Yelp and TripAdvisor. And so what essentially it is saying is that if I go to a restaurant and for whatever reason I don't like the restaurant service, maybe the quality of the food, I give it a negative rating and or a negative comment, then there is liability that I could sue TripAdvisor as a restaurant, I could sue TripAdvisor, right, or Yelp. So it gives a protection of TripAdvisor and Yelp to be able to have the type of platform that allows those type of comments to go forward. I was talking with somebody last night because this is things I do is talk about Section 230 over wine, and he compared the analogy to a paper boy back in the day, and he was saying Section 230 is essentially is the paper boy, and the paper they're delivering is like the New York Times or the Washington Post. And so he was saying, do you want to sue the paper boy, which is like the Facebook, the Twitters, or the TripAdvisors, or do you want to have issues with the publisher, which is the Facebook, which is the Washington Post and the New York Times? And so I think it's important that we kind of teach the audience a little bit in the most simplistic use cases of what Section 30 is. There's a lot of individuals, such as Roger said, is that people want regulation within Section 230. I believe even Mark Zuckerberg is interested in having a carve out. I know that is a big term of the day, carve out. So we can think about the filibuster. A carve out of Section 230 that will create a certain limit of liability for these platforms, right? And as a carve out, what needs to be done is you need to have industry regulations that would then set the standard across the board so that when these big platforms and big tech companies are in violation of it, then they could be held liable. I think we're moving now in a direction where these companies in Section 230 was so protected, but I think now as we begin to learn more and through Francis' incredible testimony, the public pressure will be there on Congress and elected officials to put more pressure on how can we modify modify and do carve-outs to Section 230, but that still allows the type of freedom of speech to exist and to move forward. Also, too, I found interesting is that I'm glad where Frances went to was, I thought in the beginning, before she began her testimony this morning, we all thought it was going to be this very explosive burn the house down. But what I loved about her testimony is how fair she has been. She has been very hard on Facebook. She's been very hard on the systems that they are overlooked. She's been very hard on how they have allowed profits over people. But then she's also been very honest in the fact that these complications and problems are so nuanced. She actually used the word empathy. She said, I actually have empathy for Instagram as they began to solve these incredible problems. Kira, Facebook has 2.8 billion users in over 130 countries. This isn't like the tobacco industry. This isn't the coal industry. This isn't the FDA, drug administration, when you have 2.8 billion users who are using it over time. Roger said something really interesting in the previous block, and I thought it was brilliant, where he talked about before he got with Facebook, Facebook wasn't a news feed, didn't have a news service. Well, look where it has grown now. That is the power of AI. That is the power of machine learning and big data. And when you have 2.8 billion users, the new use cases that you have from it, the larger narrative of this federal regulatory body that Frances is suggesting, which I am a big advocate of, needs to be focused on the AI, the artificial intelligence. That is what is causing some of the most harm that is having impact on young girls when it comes to eating disorders. But Kira, also too, I just did a random Google search right now during the hearing, and I typed in the word love. When I typed in the word love, you know what came up, Kira? No Black images. Let me say not none, but 6 Black where 2 people, the 2 partners were Black. I had to get all the way down to the bottom of the page to click more search for other images to populate, where I saw 2 partners that were Black under the category of love. It's the same thing when Google had the issue when you typed in Black, images of gorillas would come up. The danger is with the AI system and the biases that are embedded in the AI system that the machine learning is learning off of because of the bad data sets that are being inputted, because there isn't diverse individuals as data scientists coming to the table to create data sets that then the machine can then learn from. Is no different, Kira, than what's happening right now in the judiciary system, where certain judges are using AI systems to recommend sentencing. So you can imagine the biases that I've been advocating for that are within those data sets that create this disparate biased outcomes of sentencing people and categories harsher than others. And so this becomes an AI narrative. So I'm really glad we're having this conversation to really broaden out and specify the importance of such a federal regulatory board. And even what's interesting, Kira, is how, there's been this narrative that Facebook needs to be broken up, the monopoly aspect of it. But even Frances herself said that that's not a good idea. That's why her testimony is so credible.
By the way, for the record, we have a lot of love for you, Mike Muse, okay? Everybody here at this network has a lot of love for you, so don't feel like you're not getting any love. But this is a good segue when you talk about the biases and just that one Google search that you did. Deidre, I know that this is something that stood out to you, and that is time and time again during the testimony, we kept hearing the description when talking about Facebook, morally bankrupt.
I liked a lot what Frances had to say about this idea of moral bankruptcy, in that that's what Facebook should just say. And she really made this very interesting allusion to personal financial bankruptcy, saying when an individual needs to file for that, the individual says, okay, I made a mistake, I got in over my head, and then there is a process to help that individual move forward with his or her life. And she's saying, essentially, that is what Congress needs to do with Facebook and for Facebook. So to Mike's point, she was sympathetic towards Facebook, saying, look, they have a difficult job, but right now they are stuck, they are in over their heads, and it seems, and I'm paraphrasing here, as if Facebook built a machine that it can't control or that it won't control. She even made a reference to Frankenstein, right? So her whole criticism of the company seems to be that it is more computer-centric versus human-centric. Now, of course, humans cost more money. That means bigger teams. That has other business implications. But she also referenced Facebook's revenue, which for the year 2020 is somewhere around $86 billion. So the company does have resources to address these issues. And I think her call is for Congress to help Facebook save itself and then also have Congress save society, particularly teen girls, from the effects of Facebook. And that really stood out to me, Kira.
Such an incredibly important mission. Perfect way to button it up. Deidre Bolton, Mike Muse, Roger McNamee, thank you all so much for just waving through the testimony today. It was powerful, it was explosive, and I know we all have our fingers crossed that change is yet to come. We'll be right back with our other top stories.